in this video I'm going to share with you how you can up your game as a forest photographer. It has become autumn, the trees are changing slowly, which is of course very beautiful. I did have a plan this morning, it did not pan out, even though there was predicted a lot of fog. I actually think that this place here is the only place in all of Denmark where we don't have thick fog. I've come to this forest, I did have another idea here, but since that did not work and there was no fog, I've come out to this open location where the fog is also evaporating already now. So when I take whatever landscape photo, like in this example here, I think of it as a theater stage. Yes, the stage in and of itself can be pretty, but I want to have some actors on that stage. So here in the background there's a beautiful little tree. Here there's like a tree stump, maybe not the most interesting. Over here in the background I also have like a tree standing out. Finding either subjects or some kind of concept for your photo when you do forest photography is such an important thing. And the subject or concept is exactly what you're going to see with the photos I take in this video. Right here is a collection of some of my older photos where you can see what I mean by having one or several actors on the theater stage. If you remove those actors, and they don't have necessarily to be a tree, the photo would probably not work. A forest is usually quite dark, especially during morning, during fog or on cloudy days. This means you'll often end up with a somehow slow shutter speed. Because of the slow shutter speed, you may end up with blurry photos. To avoid that, I recommend using a tripod when doing forest photography. Of course, a tripod will not help you avoid getting blurry branches due to wind. In such a case, your only option is to increase the shutter speed. Subjects and placement of them, balance, depth, focal lengths, visual flow, symmetry, scale, and much more are all compositional tools I cover in my ebooks on exactly that topic. Composition in landscape photography. So if you struggle with composing and structuring your forest photos, be sure to get them. With minimal text and tons of examples, they're easy to read and you will get to the point fast. In the final chapter, I put everything together which I covered in the ebook. There are links to the free light versions and the full versions in the description of the video. So even though I didn't get a whole lot of fog in the forest, there's so much moisture in the air that now that the sun is coming up, it's creating these beautiful sunbeams in through the canopy, and I can use those sunbeams as my subject or part of the composition. In this specific case here, I use them as my subject. I'm using the road 2 as a leading line, composing the photo, structuring my photo with a leading line of the road, and then making sure that these trees here kind of frame the sunbeams here in the background. Beautiful morning shot right here. Settings wise, I am bracketing this one at ISO 100, f13, f14-ish, and because I'm an aperture priority, the shutter speed will vary between the photos. I have tried a few different compositions with more or less road with different angles, also how I angle the trees, but the main point of this composition is the road leading into the light and having these beautiful sunbeams as my subject. With the release of this video, it is autumn, and autumn is usually hailed as the favorite season for landscape photographers to do forest photography. Although autumn indeed is beautiful due to the vibrant colors, there are opportunities for great forest photography year-round. So do not dismiss winter, spring and summer. Many of my personal favorite forest photos were not taken during autumn, or at least not during the period of autumn where you get the vibrant warm colors. So as I suspected, there was still fog more inland than where I was. The forest was very close to the sea, and for some reason there's just not a whole lot of fog close to the sea. I always make sure to have like backup plans when I go out to photograph, just to make sure that I benefit the most that I can from amazing conditions like the fog right here. So the composition I'm working on right now are those two trees right there with, again, the long lens. Zoom in, I use one tree in the foreground and then I have the other tree there in the background. There is actually also a tree over here in the background that I also want to see if I can incorporate with some of these two trees. Now you can also see as I move the camera to the side, I completely change the composition. I get more space between the two trees and different stuff becomes visible in the background. So that is something that is super important when you do woodland and tree photography, is how you line up the trees and especially think about your background. I do find that when I photograph trees, the background is just as important as whatever subject that you're photographing. The theater stage is as important as the actors on it. So right now I may have found my favorite composition of the morning. So I'm photographing towards the tree here using the long lens at about 135 millimeter. Have a composition somewhat like this right here. I do have quite a nice dead tree next to it, but I don't think that it adds to the scene. I think it detracts from the main tree that I'm photographing right there. Now the fog creates this super ethereal feeling to the photo that I absolutely love. That is the main reason why I prefer photographing in fog. Obviously fog also helps to separate the different elements throughout the scene, but it is definitely the feeling, the atmosphere, that's the reason why I prefer to photograph in fog, especially in forest photography. On mornings like these where you get all this fog, you can also see that I have all these spider webs right here, and I personally find that they add so much to a scene like this here. It just creates that extra feeling of a fresh morning. I've also photographed with many different focal lengths this morning, and over the years I find that for forest photography I'm shooting more or less between 24mm and 400mm. So I can't say that you should just use this lens or this lens is my preferred lens. I brought my old and good and trusty 24-105mm, but I do find for many of the compositions this morning my 50-400mm works the best. As you can see on both this and the previous photo, I avoid including the sky. The sky is often much brighter than the rest of the scene, even though the rest of the scene is full of mist and being lit by the sunlight. As we humans have a tendency to be attracted to high contrast areas, our attention will be pulled towards that sky. For the same reason, you generally also want to avoid the holes in the canopy. You can usually see the sky through the holes of the canopy and they can end up being distracting. You can solve these problems in a few different ways. I usually move back from my subject, which changes the angle of the scene and also gives a sense of compression. This is also the reason why I tend to use medium to long lenses rather than wide angle lenses for forest photography. Alternatively, you can also edit the smaller holes away in post-processing or simply crop the photo. I have several start to finish tutorials with forest scenes in my big post-processing course, along with tutorials on how to add or work with atmosphere or glow. It is in this course I share all my editing tricks and techniques. There is a link along with a discount code down in the description of the video if you want to enroll. Settings-wise, you may have noticed that I'm shooting at a stopped down aperture. The reason for this is to get as much depth of field as possible, but also to optimize the sharpness. Especially when I'm shooting with the longer focal length, which I generally do in forest photography, I get a shallower depth of field, so I have to compensate with a stopped down aperture. On top of that, in a scene like the one I'm photographing right here that just looks magical, I'm also taking two photos. So I'm taking one photo where I'm photographing my main subject, the tree, and then I'm also taking a photo of the foreground. So my focus area is spot medium, and then I can simply just use my joystick to move that around. So I simply just back button focus, first take the tree shot, and if we just zoom in and go all the way down, you can see the foreground is a bit out of focus. So I simply just enlarge the screen, go all the way in, and just focus on the foreground and take that shot too. Those two photos I then combine in Photoshop, so I have a sharp foreground and a sharp subject. This is called focus stacking. You can do it in many different ways. If you have a complex scene, then I would suggest to definitely make sure to get my course and see how you do it. However, in this specific example, it should be fairly easy to mask them together manually in Photoshop. With only very few exceptions, like in this video, I generally always shoot towards the light when photographing trees and forests. This is because trees generally always look best either backlit or lit from the side, and likewise, photographing towards the light, everything else present in the atmosphere like fog, mist, raindrops, spiderwebs, seeds and dust catch the light from the sun and help create separation, depth and atmosphere in your photos. If you struggle with composition or editing your landscape photos, be sure to get my eBOOKs and post-processing course. There are links to those and everything else in the description of the video. I hope you learned something and can apply it to your own forest photography. See you next time.